Okay, now you've started. Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to our fireside chat. My name is Margaret Pulte, and I am the CFES GEAR UP Fellow at Mariah Central School down in Port Henry, New York. And I use she, her pronouns, and I'm trying to think of other things I should tell you. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, went to school at Colgate University and just graduated this past May. And I am going to be the interviewee for today's fireside chat, but I'm sitting here with Claire, my roommate, so that's how we're able to be here maskless with each other. And I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a CFES GEAR UP Fellow, so I work here in the office. We're in the CFES Center right now with this really toasty fire. And I also work at Willsboro Central School with Rose, who's helping out with tech support today. And yeah, so the three of us live together, which is why we are doing these fireside chats like this. I think a lot of us who are involved in the remote work, remote learning, are really used to seeing people, like individual people on a screen, and that can get kind of tiring without varying things up a little bit. So we came up with this idea to continue having conversations with people that we would love to see in person but can't right now. And so that's where the idea of the fireside chat came to be. Obviously, everyone knows that we've been living in a global pandemic. I think we just came up on the 1-year anniversary of the first COVID case was yesterday. So it's been a long year for everyone. And as well as the pandemic, a lot of things that go along with that, like mental health is something that we wanted to acknowledge. I know that's something that I've been struggling with a lot, and I'm sure a lot of other people have too. So I guess take this conversation with a grain of salt, because everything that we're talking about is, it's best practices, but it's best practices in like the best situation. And so the topic for today is tips for virtual learning, which is something that we've had experience with as students for a very brief period. I also graduated from Colgate in May, so we went remote in March. And now we have started working with 3rd through 9th graders who are in hybrid scenarios, so sometimes virtual, sometimes in person. So we're coming at this from a few different angles, which is why we want to have this conversation.
So I think it's important to keep Claire's point in mind regarding the way that these are really best case scenario suggestions. Sometimes we try something in the virtual world and it does not work.
And that's okay.
And like it happens to me all the time. It happened to me Tuesday, which was yesterday. It happened to me yesterday with a class. But trying to connect this back to CFES a little bit and what we do at CFES Brilliant Pathways, I'll just take a minute to introduce you to our core practices. We do 3 things mostly in schools. We run different types of mentoring events. So some schools have in-house mentoring programs. Other schools have e-mentoring. It kind of varies. We throw like big, large-scale mentoring events at our headquarters and invite people from the surrounding areas. We also teach the essential skills. This usually happens in classrooms, sometimes it happens virtually, and the essential skills are perseverance, teamwork, leadership, agility, goal setting, and networking. And so that's something that really plays a part in everything we do. And then our final kind of key core practice, thank you, is pathways to college and career. I believe is the phrase that we like to use. So basically that can be anything and anything. It can be talking about financial aid to a group of high school students. It can be running career events for 3rd graders. Last week I had a meteorologist and a professor of meteorology come in and talk to my 6th graders. So that was really fun, and they just talked about what it looked like to be in that profession and how they got there, and their college careers, and it was a really wonderful experience. So those are our core practices in a nutshell.
And for our GEAR UP grant, so that's the 7 schools we work with in the Adirondacks, we also have some key objectives or things that we work on or try to focus on with our students. And so those are things like financial literacy, preparing for academics, preparing for post-secondary plans, whatever that might look like, STEM readiness, family engagement, and civic engagement. So those are the things that we focus on, particularly in our GEAR UP schools. but that also translates to some of the work we do with some of our CFES schools as well. So Margaret mentioned career hour type things. So we have a career hour on Friday that Rose will be leading with some nurses in the area. And so that's a Gear Up event, but it's also open to some of our CFES schools too. Yeah.
Great. So today, Claire is going to be interviewing me about tips for virtual learning. I don't claim to be an expert at all, but like Claire said, I have been a student in the virtual learning world, March, April, and May of last year. And then this summer, I had the chance to transition in-life programming to a virtual format. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I think that gave me a really good perspective and a fresh perspective almost on how to think about learning in the real and virtual worlds. So should we get going?
Yeah, so the first question I'm going to ask Margaret, and I'll jump into a little bit, is starting back as a student. What are some strategies that worked for you as a virtual learner? So especially in the March to May time period.
So Claire and I were finishing our senior years from home, which was pretty tricky. We had some very big papers due. But things that I did that helped with my success. I think number one is that I set up a workspace for myself. And so I was the type of student in college where I had a favorite floor on the library. I liked to be sitting in a chair. It was the third floor.
Okay.
I liked to be sitting in a chair facing like a certain direction. I used to sit in the left chairs that were facing the right wall from the entrance. Which means nothing to you all if you've never been a case guy or a library on Colgate's campus. It's beautiful. But it was really important to me to have that familiar place to go back to. So when I was home, I had two different setups basically. I had a setup for where I did work. That was a specific chair on my family's kitchen table. And then I had two different places where I went to class. So I would either zoom in from the desk in my room, or my family has this really nice sun porch, and there's a chair out there. So my sister and I, she was home too doing virtual learning, we would kind of fight over the chair on the porch to see who could get there first. And so I think that was really important. It kind of kept me centered when I was learning. So I knew that when I was sitting in that chair at the kitchen table, I was writing a paper. And when I was sitting in my chair in my room, I was supposed to be focusing on what my professor was saying. So I think that was something I did. Another, I think I have two more points. And one takes me back to my sister. We took brain breaks every day at the same time. So every single day, sometime between 10 and 11, we would go on a walk together. So sometimes the walk was literally around the block, and sometimes we would wander around for an hour and a half. It just depended on what our workload looked like. But I think it was really important to take that break away from the screen. And I'll talk about that later, what it means to take a break from the screen and still be learning. I think that's really important. We took brain breaks. And then last but not least, I think it's really easy when you're learning virtually to do school at all hours of the day or to teach at all hours of the day, right? So sometimes when people are working from home or learning from home, it's like 7 p.m. on a Thursday and they're like typing a paper, which is normal for a college student. It's normal to be working that late for a college student. But I really tried to keep the times where I wouldn't be working if I was living on campus, right? So Friday and Saturday nights, I wouldn't be working. I'd be getting dinner with my friends. We'd be going to a movie. I loved the movie theater in the town where I went to school. And so I tried to keep those times like for myself and for my friends. And so we would watch movies together over Zoom and do that sort of thing. So I think it was really important for me to build in that social time and keep that structure too, so structured social time.
Yeah, I had fairly similar strategies, I would say. I had one set up where there's a corner of my house where it's like there's windows on either side of the corner, and we had a little table that's not usually set up, but we set it up there. And then we had a puzzle on that table, and then a surface that we could put over the puzzle. So I would go back and forth between working on the puzzle and working on my homework or writing my thesis. So that was really helpful because it was like my workspace, but it was also a space where I could put my laptop away and do something else. That helped me like get back to focusing on what I wanted to do. And then sometimes I would work outside in my hammock. So that was, yeah. It depended on the thing I was doing. It worked really well for reading, but not necessarily writing.
That's very fair.
So yeah, those were some of the strategies I used. So going back to how you mentioned you transitioned the Wilderness Adventure Program of Colgate's outdoor education program, which is usually a week-ish long,
6 days.
6 days long trip. I took it when I was a first year. And so obviously we weren't able to do that this year at Colgate, and so why don't you tell us a little bit about how you transitioned that to the virtual world?
Yeah. So this is one of my proudest professional achievements. I won't talk for forever, but Wilderness Adventure, the short form for that is WA, is a pre-orientation program for Colgate University freshmen. So they arrive on campus before school starts, and they go with the outdoor ed program on a 6-day wilderness trip, and usually those trips are rock climbing and backpacking and canoeing, and some people go sea kayaking. I know that's what Claire did.
That's what I did.
And they're super, super fun. You leave your phone behind. You go with 2 to 3 leaders and a group of 10 other first years. And it's just 6 days of learning something new and being away from technology and meeting new people, and it's wonderful. It's my favorite time of the year. But this year, we obviously could not take college freshmen from all over the country, put them together, and then put them in tents in the wilderness away from medical care. So we decided to go virtual, which was a very wild ride. So basically, the end result, we had 2 sessions, and it was 4-day virtual trips. So the virtual trips didn't have the same topics. So instead of backpacking, we had things like cooking and baking and creative writing. We had a book club. We had a trip on sustainability. But then we also had a couple that were outdoor education based. We had a road biking trip where people biked individually in their own hometowns. We had a survival course where some of our leaders taught survival virtually. It was very, very fun. They did a wonderful job. And then the setup of how we made that happen, basically. During the summer, I worked with 2 other women, Cassie and Grace, and the 3 of us pulled this all together. So we tried to create a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous virtual time. So every morning, the groups would meet for an hour, and they would do some warm-ups and get to know you. They would explain what you were doing that day. This was with 2 leaders, 2 outdoor education staff members working remotely. And then they would send you off on your asynchronous day. So during the day, you would engage over this platform called Discord, which was created to be used by gamers, but has really been embraced by a lot of social groups, mostly because it has so many different ways for you to connect. So it has video conferencing, you can phone call, you can text, you can voice text, you can send photos, you can send PDFs that talk back to you. Like, you can literally do anything on this app. So that's why we use Discord. So during the day, you would do things alone that related to your activity. So somebody might say, like, bake your favorite dessert, and that's what you would do that day. And then at night, you had 2 hours of synchronous time again, where you would log back onto Zoom, and you would talk about what you did that day. You would usually do a group bonding activity at night. Like the first night, for example, everybody watched a short documentary relating to what they did. So the cooking and baking trip watched an episode of The Great British Bake Off, and like everybody dressed up as their favorite characters. It was very fun. I'm trying to think what else I can tell you that's relevant. I'll tell you 2 more points. So I think one of the reasons it was so successful is because we focused on taking the curriculum that we used in our normal outdoor programming and converting it to an online format. So I'm trying to think of an example. We have this session during WA that's called the Colgate Talk, where leaders answer questions that students have about what it means to live on campus. So it's like, how much time do you spend studying? What happens if I can't make friends? What happens if I don't get along with my roommate? That sort of thing. And so we found a way to convert that to, still be anonymous, like it is in real life. Usually in real life, you just write it down on a note and stick it in a hat. So we came up with an anonymous form collection, to make sure that students still have that opportunity. We make these things called full value contracts, where it's a behavioral agreement for the week. We found out how to do that with a whiteboard app that we could post over our Discord channel, so everyone could still see it and still held to the same standards that you would be in real life. So I think that's one reason we were so successful. And I think the other is that we tried really hard to use a wide variety of online tools. So we used PowerPoints, we used Jamboards, we used Flipgrid, we created videos, we had people do different online challenges. Some groups were just reading things online, other groups were writing and submitting them to different forms. So anything you can think of, we probably tried. So I'll stop there because I really could talk about it all day. But that's what we did. We took real life programming, we put it online, we converted our curriculum to an online format, and most importantly, we tried to, the essence of Wilderness Adventure is that you connect, right? You connect with staff members who are already Colgate students, you connect with new incoming first years at Colgate who you think you could build a community with, and our number one goal was to keep that connection, and I think we did that. So
That's nice.
yeah.
So thinking about some of the things that worked for you, what can educators do now to make virtual learning more effective for the students?
Okay, so this is where I give a big acknowledgement to the way the pandemic works. All of the students that I had signing up for this programming signed up voluntarily, right? So I think that makes a huge difference. They signed up because they had heard that Outdoor Ed runs good programming and helps you meet people. So they signed up because they were like, maybe I can still meet people. I'm scared to start my freshman year. So I think it is a little bit different than anything you would have in a classroom, but I think we can still learn from it, which is great. I think the number one thing is going back to what I just said about using a wide variety of online tools. My new favorite one is the Google Jamboards. I did not know about it before this summer, but I think Jamboards are awesome. They're like sticky notes that you can move around and manipulate, and I think it's a really great way for students to interact online. We used PowerPoints, we used annotation tools, anything you can think of where you can get your students engaged in a new way. I had one professor during the time when I was a student in the spring I can't even think of the name now, use this online tool where students could group annotate a paper and ask each other questions. They could like literally all write on the same PDF. It was really cool. So if I had a question, I could highlight it and be like, you know, at Claire, like, what do you think this means? And you could respond to my question, right? So that was like a whole new thing I never thought about, like being able to do, but it's all out there because people have thought about this before. So I think that's my number one point. I think my second thought about why our programming was effective this summer is because my boss, Ben, I think he heard it somewhere where it was listed as a very true statistic, but when we first started, we started talking about the attention span of students. And apparently, online, it is only 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So he had a rule that anytime we assigned something or anytime we came up with a plan for the day for a group, we could give 20 minutes worth of material or 20 minutes worth of an activity, and then we had to take a break. So a lot of what my job was actually coming up with what those breaks would be. We played Simon Says over the internet. You know, you can have everybody stand up in front of their camera on Google Meet and play Simon Says. We taught people how to twirl a pencil. People would teach mini art classes, so they would like have everybody take out a sticky note, and like if you were good at art, the leaders would say, okay, we're gonna learn something really quick, and like, right, it's a break from what you're doing. And I think having those brain breaks and that 20-minute limit for yourself was really, really important. Another note about that is that my programming was only effective because I had a wonderful staff. They're hardworking, they were really dedicated to giving these first years the best experience they could have. And I think their enthusiasm made it what it is. So I think being enthusiastic, even when something goes wrong, is okay because a lot of things went wrong this summer, as well as right.
Oh. I think you probably also had more creative license though.
I did. I do think we have more creative license than most teachers do.
Yeah.
We don't have tests or standards. I'm checking my notes quickly. This is my favorite point. I'm glad I checked my notes. So I'm a sucker for learning outside of the classroom. I've learned to teach in an outdoor education program, so in my mind, everything should happen outdoors, and I know that can't happen in the real world. But the thing I wrote down on my piece of paper, it says, lean into the fact that learning can happen outside of the classroom. So my advice to you is to send kids outdoors, send them into their kitchens, and send them into the next room to drop a ball and see gravity in action. Right? So there are ways you can get kids moving and away from the computer screen that engages them in a new way. And I know, right, I was working with college freshmen, so mostly 17 and 18-year-olds, who I could say, leave your house, like wear a mask, and I knew they would all do it because they were adults. So So I acknowledge that that is potentially hard if you're a third grade teacher and you're thinking, I can't let my kid leave the Zoom screen, like what's gonna happen, right? Like that's not, you have different responsibilities. But you can say, okay, everybody go get a pillow. And they run and get a pillow and they come back and you say, okay, now everybody stand up and drop the pillow, right? And you can like do different things with that where it becomes engaging in a new way. So I'm a huge proponent of that. I'm a huge proponent of going outside. I understand that can't happen, but right, there's ways to do it that is engaging and fun for students. So that is my advice.
Yeah. So now thinking about students, what can students do to get the most out of virtual learning?
My first piece of advice, students, and if you're watching this, you're probably old enough to hear me say this, is that your teachers are working so hard to make this good for you, to keep school normal, to keep school fun, to keep school engaging the way it should be. So the thing you can do is give your best effort, right? Also, you can say thank you to your teacher because I know that would go a really long way. But give your best effort. Let's see what else I wrote. Oh, and then take the advice that Claire and I gave you at the beginning of this video about when we were learners, and create a workspace for yourself. Create a spot in your home where you say, every day I'm gonna log in from here, because that type of repetition can be really good for learning. I have 2 more points for you, 3 more points. The first is to ask questions. I think you learn best when you ask questions, so I know that it's a challenge to unmute yourself.
You can also use the chat.
And say, hey, hey, let's say Mrs. Carson, right? Like that's Claire's last name. Hey, Mrs. Carson, I don't understand this. Just do it, okay? It's gonna be fine, I promise you. My next point is gonna be even more challenging. Have your camera on. You know why? I know it's like the worst thing I could be asking you to do, students watching this webinar, but if you have your camera on, you are holding yourself accountable to your learning process. Your teacher can see you, and you can see your teacher, and even though it's virtual, there's learning that happens when you see someone face to face, right? So if Claire's teaching me something and I can see her, she can see the confusion in my face, so maybe she goes and rephrases something, right? She can see that, but if I don't have my camera on, she doesn't know that I need help. So have your camera on, ask questions, even if it's in the chat. And then my last one is the same piece of advice I just gave teachers, right? So try and find ways to make learning happen outside of the screen, outside of the box you're on. So ask your parent if you can help them make dinner. So you practice your math with measuring. We have decided as a household that we don't like to measure when we bake things.
Okay.
Claire is a very experimental cook over here, and for example, last night she made eggplant parmesan without any direction.
No, I had some direction, I just didn't really look at it.
Okay, so she didn't look at the direction, she pulled up for herself. Right, but there's math involved in cooking. Ask your parent if you can help with that. Ask your parent or guardian if you know, there's so many different ways to learn. If you can help them read the newspaper, I don't know. When I was little, my mom used to love doing these crossword puzzles, and we would help her with that. You know, there's ways to learn outside of what you
are like required to learn.
Yeah, and it can be more fun, you know.
Yeah.
I'll go back to my mom because I think my parents did a really good job with this, but my mom doesn't like to ask people to do things that she thinks she could do herself, which is something I so admire in her, but sometimes she gets into these situations where she's suddenly building like an 150-foot fence just like solo in our backyard. Right, so ask your parent if you can help with something like that. I learned a lot when I measured boards and like had to like, you know, it was all really good for my learning. So that's my piece of advice to you, because it's also more fun.
Yeah. So, like I said, I've been working at Willsboro, and so we've been fairly lucky so far. We've been able to maintain in-person learning for the most part. There are still opportunities for remote learners if they want to go or need to go remote, but for the most part, Rose and I have been in classrooms, teachers have been in classrooms, students have been in classrooms, but we're now getting to the point where there's been an increase in cases in a lot of parts of the US, and some of our Gear Up schools are deciding to go remote for the holiday season, more or less. There's some variation depending on the school. So my next question, and I'm not saying you can like answer it, but how can teachers and students prepare now if they do have the opportunity to be in person or to be in hybrid models, in the event that there is a quick transition to remote learning once again in the winter?
Well, the first thing I will say, shout out to Mariah Central School here. Mariah has been doing practice virtual days, so I think it's been once a month since we started. There's been either 2 or 3, and we're having another one on Monday. We've had virtual practice days, so everyone stays home. The teachers come into school and they teach from their classrooms, but all of the students stay home and they have to log on during the day just like they would if you were remote learning, right? So that way you have a remote day, and if something goes wrong, you can come back to being in person the next day and say, you know, Miss Claire, like that didn't work, can we figure this out? And that ability to have something go wrong, but then problem solve face to face has helped Mariah, I think, really set itself up for success if they have to go virtual. So that's my suggestion. I would tell all schools to be doing that right now. Another thing is to practice what you will do virtually in the classroom, right? So I talked about brain breaks, right? Playing Simon Says, learning how to twirl a pen, anything like that. You can do those in the classroom too, so that when you say, okay, everybody stand up, we're gonna do Simon Says, it might be a little bit harder to explain the rules of Simon Says over like a phone call, right? So maybe explain the rules when you have the students in class. That way when you say, we're gonna take a break, we're gonna do this, they all know what it means. And then I think my last one, and I think Mariah, where I work now, has been doing a really good job at this as well, is introducing students to the technology they'll be using before they're using it. So we have a lot of classes right now requiring that students learn how to insert text boxes into a PowerPoint slide and put their answers for their tests in there. And they could just be using paper because they're in person and you can hand sanitize till the cows come home. But, right, they're practicing putting text boxes in PowerPoints and opening up a Word document and hitting submit on a Google Classroom assignment. And I think that's really important. Whatever platform you use, Google Meet, Zoom, practice using it now. That way when the time comes when you have to use it, it might be a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's something that I've been trying to do with some of the students that I've been working with, is even if we have the opportunity to use in-person tools, I've been using, they have Chromebooks, which is really nice, so we're able to use Chromebooks as much as possible so that they're prepared to use it at home. And I think, so the last question, and this isn't necessarily just about virtual learning, but also about being human. How can teachers and students help each other out? Thinking about the rest of the school year and school years to come.
You said this is about being human, and I think that's really important. I think kindness is huge. Today we talked in one of my classes at Mariah, we talked about how kindness can be a skill. And I think it can be a skill, and I think it's a really important skill to have, is when you can be kind to someone regardless of the circumstance. But I have 2 thoughts. One goes towards, I think both maybe, well, we'll start with one. I think this one is more towards students, but I think you have to be more honest with your teachers than you expect. So, like, I know that when students don't log on, teachers are so frustrated, right? Because they put in all this effort into this planning and they've tried to make this lesson for you and you're just not there. And I think it's okay when you're learning virtually to be honest with your teacher and say, I'm really burnt out, or I'm having trouble with this type of assignment. Could you please assign me something that's more independent work or something like this? If you don't communicate honestly with your teacher, they will have no idea and they can't help you. And just not logging on or not doing your work doesn't do that, so you have to vocalize. And that gets harder when you're not face-to-face, right? When your teacher can't stop you after class and say, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, you have to be able to say, I need more independent work. Like, this is hard for me. I don't have internet here, but if we schedule class 20 minutes later, I get dropped off at grandma's house and I have internet there. And I think, I think that goes both ways with teachers too. If you can be honest with your students, I think that sets a really good example. Show up every day with your camera on, all members of all parties, students included. Turn your camera on. I'll say it now and I'll say it again. Do your best for teachers and students. I know that this can be exhausting for teachers, and some days it is easy to show up and to make a PowerPoint and to have your students listen to the PowerPoint. But I think students do better when there's a variety and when you're using all sorts of virtual tools and when you are finding new ways to engage students and new ways to help them be independent and to be learners. And I think that that's on teachers as well, to innovate and to think, how can I do this so that my students are engaged? Because it's tiring, it's so tiring.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add to that is doing your best one day can be different the next.
Oh yeah.
So also just forgiving yourself, you know, these are not normal circumstances to be teaching or learning, so doing your best for, you know, the hour that you're in is really all you can do and all you can be expected to do.
Yes.
And yeah.
I have one more thing. I wrote really good notes, so I should keep checking. My advice to teachers and students, this is to both of you, is to take suggestions from each other. One of my very first classes at Mariah, I had a student, his name's Michael. I had a student come up to me and make a suggestion to my plan that I had tried to adapt for COVID, 6 feet, like, gotta keep you away from each other, nobody touch anything, right? Like, and he was like, why don't we try this? And I was like, that is such a good idea. Why don't we try that, right? So I changed my lesson plan, and instantly, kids were more engaged. They liked Michael's idea way better than they liked mine, which is fine, right? Because Michael is a 5th grader, and he was giving me a suggestion for a 5th grade class. It was awesome. But I think my program director, his name's Ron Ricks, he was helping me solve a problem at school the other day, and he goes, why don't you just ask the 9th grade? I had a question about the 9th grade, and he was like, why don't you just ask a 9th grader? And I think that can be a really powerful tool, right? Like if you're not getting through to your students, or you feel like your students aren't there, ask them. See what they say. And maybe they don't say anything, and that's okay. But listen to each other, because I think you can help each other, students and teachers, solve problems.
Yeah, I think that definitely plays into our core practice of mentoring. So mentoring doesn't always have to be formalized, it can be informal.
Yep.
And so the key thing that we like to talk about when we talk about mentoring is that mentors and mentees are learning from each other. It's not like a one-way process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's it.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
Okay. Rose, how we doing in the chat? Anything? No? Alright, that's okay. So my email is claire@brilliantpathways.org. Margaret is margaret@brilliantpathways.org. If you ever want to reach out, brainstorm, anything like that. This recording will go on our website on the member section. So if you are not on the member section of our website, you can reach out to me and I can help you get on there. There's a number of virtual resources that you can tap into, and they can be really helpful on those days when you don't feel like teaching. You can just pull up one of our virtual resources for the day and call it a day. And so that's something that we can offer you, and hopefully you can get some use out of it.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. I had fun with this.
Yeah,
and I hope
this fire is super cozy, so.
Yeah, great. All right, well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.